innovative with respect to OER, particularly if you see that you have large numbers of students that are taking advantage of the dual enrollment. That cost factor comes back to you in so many different ways. Many of our textbooks are not as economical, I will say, for some of our students. So we have textbook affordability task forces across all of our 28 colleges that work particularly to see how we can make college more affordable for our students. So meanwhile, if you have students that are going to be participating in our process and the part of our system, they're going to be utilizing those textbooks. Hence, the burden of the costs in many different ways lies in our school districts. So I think that this conversation is very forward-thinking with regards to the questions and responses. I'm glad to hear us dialoguing about this, because I think that you're going to see this become more and more of an issue for our K through 12 districts as it pertains to the cost.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I add something?
Of course.
I just want everyone to understand that the Department of Education, there are 3 branches of government. We're not the judicial branch. We're not the legislative branch. We're in the executive branch. We execute things. So when Kathy relays things to you, we're just executing the laws that are passed, and we don't have any control over that branch of government. I'm from a very small district, one of the smallest in the state, and we rely, Liberty County, we're halfway between Tallahassee and Panama City Beach, if you've ever been up that way. And slow down if you come there, because we catch a lot of people. That's how we make money. On the way to the beach. But we're a really small district. We have 3 district people in addition to the superintendent. And when you're in a small district and you have to wear a lot of hats, we depend on the small and rural districts depend on the process that the state goes through to vet these materials. And when you're talking about having a guaranteed viable curriculum, I think that's a big impact that the state has that supports, especially the smaller districts, is they go through that process for us, and it kind of validates and verifies that there's material out there for us to select from that's already been through that process that will guarantee that our kids have access to that quality of material. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can go now.
Trust me, the goal of my questions wasn't to get you run out of the building. So we'll move a little bit, I guess, on the lighter side of this, because that was pretty heavy. So I'm going to kind of combine questions 2 and 4 a little bit. So we've moved from a 100% paper-based environment, and I have to throw another aside. My cousin teaches high school English in East Providence, Rhode Island, and up until 4 years ago was sharing 50 textbooks between 3 teachers and still writing on a chalkboard. So I have those conversations with people in our district all the time when they complain that their computer didn't work that day. And I said, listen, you walked in to a district and someone handed you a $1,200 computer to use every day, and we have whiteboards and all of this stuff. And I said, there's still places that just don't have what we have. So I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind. I think it's important to keep that in the back of our mind when we're discussing having all of these options for instructional materials available to our students and our teachers. So we've moved from a 100% paper-based environment to a multimedia environment, and slowly to what I would call an internet-based delivery model. So here comes the multifaceted question. Are we moving in the right direction? Is a purely digital or live instructional materials program attainable and sustainable? And with respect to that, we hear and talk about bring your own device districts that implement a BYOD, bring your own device district, and places that are fortunate enough around the state and the country to attempt to implement or are implementing one-to-one, where every kid gets a device. And I like to refer it as the equity and access issue. And that is, regardless of whether we hand kids devices or they're required to bring their own device, you know, how do districts manage that? So I'll just rephrase that again. So moving the direction that instructional materials is moving from purely paper to multimedia to live, everyday, content changing instructional materials, is that attainable? Is it sustainable? And then how in turn do we address the equity and access issues for our students?
So in Lake County, we had a challenge about a year and a half ago. And you may have heard this story, or you may have lived this story, depending on your life in your own district. We had an aging fleet of student devices. Actually, the average age of the device in Lake County was 9.5 years old. And so, even though you can get PCs to go that long, like you can imagine what their performance was like and how frustrating that is to a teacher. When you talk about delivering instructional materials, it takes 10 minutes to get updates and start, then that definitely eats into instructional time. We brought in 300 Chromebooks as a test case. As I sit here a year later, slightly tired from it, we have 13,076 Chromebooks either purchased or on the way in the last shipment. And so one of the things that we have done is that as a kind of sort of a charge from our superintendent to renew that instructional technology. What that meant is that we're shaping the classroom, right? You cannot bring in that number of devices and not have a definitive impact. I will say this, is that when you ask whether it's the right direction, I think it is. Obviously, we're kind of the evangelist of that to some extent, because I do believe those digital tools are important. That access is important, and that's what we're talking about, is expanding technology access. Sometimes I feel like one-to-one gets you a little bit trapped into getting to 100% every student, but let's be real, we need to get more technology in the students' hands. And some of that included the ability to be able to have it, go home with them. And so right now, like I said, we've got 2 high schools. Now I'm joining our other high school to do that. But I'm going to tell you, from what I've seen it do instructionally, it's pretty radical. It's not just the instructional materials, it's also how they're going to deliver content. And what I mean by that is it's going to be how they teach. We have a very strong focus on authentic literacy. And so it doesn't naturally feel like it's hand in glove, right? But I can tell you we've seen some great tools be used, whether it's the Google Apps for Education or so on. But where I'm getting at in the instructional materials part is that I do feel like we have to meet the student learner where they are. They aren't opening a whole bunch of more Barnes & Nobles these days. And what I mean by that is that even though I do believe the best environment is a print environment, it's sort of a hybrid environment, the truth of the matter is that, it's kind of funny, we will do things for school and then there's the rest of life, and the rest of life, there is a lot of digital consumption. I will say one quick thing before I turn it back over. On BYOD, it's incredibly tough technically. You talk about kind of sort of a challenge for the teacher. As a teacher, if I'm going to deliver these instructional materials, but I'm also going to have to troubleshoot your phone from 4 years ago, and whether it's had an operating system update, and if the screen's too big, I do think districts have to be very, very clever about how they try to get this technology access expanded, because we need a uniform device in districts for us to be able to deliver that technically correctly. The platforms are just not, they've made leaps and bounds technically, but they're still a little slippery, right? And troubleshooting 10 devices in a classroom is just too much of a burden for a teacher. It's not what they do. So I do think it's attainable. I think you have to have a very systemic plan. And I will say this, is that we are big believers in that technology going home. We've started to research ways to creatively fund hotspots to go home. There are filtered hotspots that will allow you to do that. They're kind of throttled to a particular data plan, for lack of a better term. But I will tell you that ever since I've been in instructional technology for about 20 years, we've kind of stared at the digital divide, and we go, that's a big divide, and it never seems like we start the process of building that bridge. And I think we're going to have to do that in multiple ways. There's all kinds of strategies to take that on.
Just real quick, Dwayne is absolutely right. I just wanted to quickly add that, yes, I do believe that we are moving in the right direction. I say all the time when I'm working with the educators, There are some things that we have a choice at, and some things life just keeps going. So if we're going to keep up with what we see with respect to digital consumption, it behooves us in order to continue to find ways in order to strategically and effectively implement technologies across our school districts. But having said that, I think our bigger issue is, I know that as educators, it's absolutely attainable. The big question for me is the sustainability, because of the cost impact that it has on not only the districts to provide that infrastructure to support it. I know what we see in a lot of our colleges, that is a big challenge with respect to the Wi-Fi on campus, the infrastructure, keeping up with the technologies. And when you start to do the BYOD, that adds an additional level of complexity there.
Just want to reiterate something that Kathy said earlier, in that 100% anything is probably not the right answer. We know from UDL that we have multiple means of presentation, and some students are going to respond to print better, and so we want to continue to keep that in mind. So 100% is the either or, right? It's a both and. I think that there's always going to be a place for print, but clearly digital is the way of the future. And if we're holding our students back from that by not giving them that opportunity, I think that's a detriment to those that are ready to make that leap across the divide. And being afraid to take that leap because we can't do it 100% is not really fair to those that are ready to make that leap. They need to have that opportunity to spread their wings and be challenged. I go back, I use a lot of metaphors that may or may not be appropriate, but not every kid shows up with a pencil and paper. It doesn't mean we don't use pencil and paper, right? When we had supply lists for have a calculator for your high school calculus class, now your kid has a calculator. It doesn't mean we don't use a calculator. We're supplementing those, and we're supporting those that can, but we're allowing those that can to move further, and that's what their parents, I think, would want. That's what I think is causing some of the consternation, like we're talking about local control. When parents see that their child has an opportunity to go further, but the public school system isn't doing that because we're afraid of certain pitfalls, and they get frustrated with us. So we've got to embrace this digital culture that we're in and be ready to advance and learn from it, and just keep moving forward and understand that it's not going to be perfect, but not be afraid of making some of those missteps and achieve as much as we possibly can, as early as we possibly can.
I'm going to make something that might sound a little controversial, which is, I'm going to argue we're already in a one-to-one environment. And it may not be official, and there may not be policies in place that do it in the classroom, but I think to Dwayne's point, if you look at learning as a 24/7 experience, then our kids are already in a one-to-one environment. And I think it's our job as educators, and it's our job on the industry side to make sure that we're building all of the right supports and tools to facilitate that learning to happen 24/7, anytime, anywhere. And I think you look at, I travel the country and I'm in a lot of different classrooms and a lot of different settings, and teachers are incredibly innovative, they're incredibly creative, and they're finding solutions to work around things that many policies are either not enabling or not officially declaring. So I'd say we're already there. We're already in the one-on-one environment. Kids have it. I think we can all reach within our pocket, and kids are reaching in their pockets. They have it. And this spans socioeconomics. You can go if you look at purchasing patterns for devices. It is an equal opportunity access point, and I think it's our job to figure out how can we embrace that. And not get too hung up in the official policies to plug into it, but recognize that it's going to happen, and it's already happening, and let's find the ways to support it.
Okay, thank you. So Ed, we're going to start to wind up, and I'll ask, I'll combine two more questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions. So. And no offense to our publishers that are in the room when I ask this next question, but who do you see being the producers of the next wave of instructional materials? Will it continue to be our major textbook publishers, Or will we see something different? That's the first part, and then the second part is really going to take that into the classroom. So how will the delivery and design of instruction change as instructional materials adapt to the future?
So just speaking to a second about the power of technology, one thing that it does better than anything else is disrupts. And so one of the things that I honestly believe is that you won't necessarily have monoliths anymore where there is just one model and this is the model. I think what you're going to see is a little bit of a fracturing to some extent. Simply because like I see it in classrooms now where teachers are kind of sort of looking for their own resources to satisfy those standards, and maybe they're not leaning on the textbook quite as much. I see also other applications such as iReady or so that have kind of sort of arisen as a possibility, like with something with a learning path that is almost kind of sort of a little bit of all one, even though it has a very tailored purpose. I guess what I'm saying is that the delivery, I'm not sure will just be like the textbook with the kit and the online resources. It may fracture a bit. It's a guess, but it's hard to know.
I do see our educators as being major producers, particularly with respect to the next wave of instructional materials. And I think that part of that, I guess because I'm coming off of a conference in which a large part of what we discussed was the issue of the fiscal impact on our colleges. And in knowing that, and in knowing the connection to K-12 and how you all have been impacted, I think that several of the questions here blend together. I think that knowing that there are so many options out there with respect to OER, the freeware and the shareware, knowing that we're seeing more and more technologies be intuitive like your iReady. I think that when we talk about how we see the materials impacted in the classroom setting, I think that you're going to see that more and more of our experts in the classrooms will be producing the materials. I do want to back up a quick second and say that yes, I do believe that the model that works the best, everything in me always screams hybrid, particularly because when you are in a hybrid environment, I think that you provide a higher probability of maintaining your equity and accessibility to all of your students. So I don't ever see the 100% model. I agree with Dwayne, there won't be one perfect model. I always speak in terms of there's no cookie cutter method, I think, for any of our districts, but I do think that as we become more savvy with respect to how we deal with impending budget cuts, we have to be more fiscally aggressive in finding ways in order to get the job done with, as they say, less. I think what it will do for us is it will encourage a paradigm shift on how we see instructional materials with respect to technology, how we implement the technology, and how we produce the technology in such a way that it customizes to what we're expected to deliver with respect to student success in our classrooms.
Okay, thank you very much. Because we're pretty much out of time for my session, I wanted to express my thanks and on behalf of Fatima, our thanks to you for coming up here, and I hope the questions weren't too difficult. Unfortunately, we won't have time to field any questions, so at this point, I would like to say you're dismissed.
Before you all leave, just 1 second. Thank you so much. How about we give our moderator a hand? We would like to do something on behalf of Fatima, and thank you again. With Rob just said, we know that some of you traveled hundreds of miles to be here with us. So we are very appreciative of you sharing your expertise with us. We would like to share with you our Fatima shirt. So everyone gets a shirt, and your shirt is here. here. Yes. So let's give our panelists another hand, please. I'm going to call our next guest of panelists up, and really quickly, if you guys would join me in the front for a quick picture. I'll call the next panelist up very shortly, just 2 minutes.